One evening, about 8 years ago, it was pouring outside and we get a call from an elderly woman. She called in and said that she was hearing footsteps in her house and she thought there was a ghost inside because she regularly heard the sound of someone walking upstairs. But she lived alone. We went there just to check it out and make sure everything was okay. She stayed on the line with the 911 operator because she was really scared. About 3 minutes after she initially called in, she said that there was actually a man standing outside in her backyard, staring at her through her sliding glass door. Petrified, the woman froze in that spot and continued to stare directly at the man. For the next minute or two, she said that he was just standing there, still as could be, staring at her. Eventually, the man took off out of sight. When we arrived, about 12 minutes after the call first came in, we went to the front door. I remained in the foyer with the woman, and the other officer went to the backyard to see if the man was still hiding out or if there were any traces of him. I spoke with her for several minutes until the other officer returned. He said that there was no trace of anyone having been in the backyard. We set off to do a quick sweep before we left to make sure the house was all clear. In her living room, the room that has the sliding glass door, we discovered a trail of mud and footprints inside the house. I asked the woman if she had been outside at all that day or if anyone had been over to visit her. She said no, that she lived alone and that no one had come by to visit her. The woman was very old, probably around 85, and had very poor eyesight and was hard of hearing, as elderly people tend to be. The woman obviously had seen the man's reflection and mistakenly thought he was in front of her, on the other side of the glass, in her backyard. In reality, he had been standing only a few feet behind her in the same room while she had been talking to 911. Nothing was stolen, broken, or out of place, so we don't know what his intentions were. Who knows what would have happened had she not stayed on the line with the operator. I know it sounds like something out of a campfire story, but it was honestly one of the most unnerving and creepy experiences I have ever had while on duty. I was a 911 dispatcher for about 5 years out of school. One night, I got a call from a lady at a residence in town. 911, what is your emergency?
Is this the police?
She was freaking out, heavy breathing, scared, shaking voice. I've taken many calls like this, and from the sound of her voice, this was not going to be a routine call. I sat up straight and my heart started to pump faster. Yes, ma'am. What is your emergency?
There's someone in my house.
She trailed off, very breathy and genuine, but not loud and freaking out. Okay, are you located at... Insert house address here.
Yes.
I dispatched the cars to start heading over to the address, and I don't give a reason yet. Okay, do you know who this person is?
Well, no, I don't think it's... I know this sounds so crazy. I think there's a ghost in my house. There's noises, and I know there's a ghost right in the other room. I can hear it right now.
At this time, the sergeant asks me the reason of the call, and why I sent him and 2 other cars without explanation. Normally, you'd send 1 car to something like that. It's suspicious activity, I told him. What activity? He demanded over the radio, which was a fair question. Sir, the caller is claiming there is someone in the house and she believes it to be a ghost. Silence on the air for about a minute. 10-4. Is all he said. By the time they got there, the ghost was gone and the poor lady was a freaked out mess, and she kept apologizing for calling us. But it was real, she kept repeating. The officers later told me that her sincerity actually freaked them out a lot, and when they searched the house, guns drawn, even they were scared. I was called to a home of an older woman, mid-60s I'd say. She reported that there were ghosts in her attic or basement every night for the past week or so. So I go in and I don't hear anything. I check the basement and the attic as she shows me around. I shine my light in the attic, but I don't see anything. The basement had lights on, but still nothing to be seen. A week goes by and I get called back to her house again, but this time I'm working a night shift. I go in and check the basement. Nothing. I check the attic and there's a man with ragged, torn clothes huddled in a corner. Apparently, he was climbing in her window on cold nights. While there were no ghosts, it really did freak me the fuck out to see someone crouched in her attic. We arrested him, but dropped the charges since what he needed was help more than a record. He was homeless, and we helped him find a shelter to go to for future needs. I haven't seen him since. It's my job to help people, protect and serve, and all that, and I try to take it to heart. I did my best to help both the resident and the trespasser. My uncle was the sheriff of a small town in New Mexico. He was the most hardcore person in our family, super straight-laced, never really bullshitted, and wasn't at all a joker. So when he told this story, which is backed up by my aunt, we all believed it without question. A local reporter named Bob D would always show up at any major police activity from the police scanner. Big car wrecks, fires, anything worth maybe reporting in the local paper. Everybody on the force knew Bob D. He was always around at least once or twice a week at various police activities. Now, Bob was a bit of a joker himself. He would mess with people by flicking behind their ears. People would react to the flicks, thinking it was a bug, only to turn around and see it was Bob just joking around. Everybody liked Bob. Unfortunately, Bob had bad lung cancer and died pretty suddenly. His wife buried him, which was against his wishes. He wanted to be cremated. For the next couple of weeks after his funeral, people kept talking about seeing Bob at car wrecks, fires, all the same stuff he used to report on. There were 20 to 30 reports like this from civilians and members of the force. My uncle, however, didn't buy it. That is, until the night he and my aunt showed up at our house, gun drawn, pale as paper. We asked him what the hell happened, and he had to sit down, take his breath, compose himself, and start to outline what happened. Just a note, this is a guy that I never saw get rattled by anything. He said, my aunt and him were sitting on the couch in their house watching TV. My uncle kept scratching at his ear over and over. Finally, my aunt asked him what the problem was, and he turned around just in time to see their bedroom door open. Bob D was standing there in the doorway, clear as day. My uncle jumped up and started cussing and got my aunt's attention, who turned to see him there too. As soon as they both made eye contact with him, Bob smiled, turned, and walked across the living room and out their front door. He closed the door behind himself and was gone. My uncle got control of himself and ran outside, gun drawn, looking for Bob, but he was gone. And at that point, they ran over to our place. We went over there and didn't see anything, but my aunt and uncle stayed at our place that night. At work the next day, all the guys on the force were giving my uncle lots of "we told you so." People around town said they saw Bob D show up at police scenes for at least another 2 to 3 months. My dad saw him in our dark room in our basement with a friend. He was flicking their ears in the dark. During the 3rd month, people that saw him kept saying he was looking worse and worse. My uncle saw him 2 more times, each time confirming that he was looking more and more worn down. My dad concluded that he was decomposing and his ghost was reflecting that process. Now, every time my ear itches, I get goosebumps. I worked as a police officer in a small town in rural Nebraska. Back in the 90s, I was patrolling through town in the winter. We had several abandoned houses in town, but one seemed to have the attraction of copper thieves, so we were told to keep an eye on it. I drove by it around 7 p.m. Since it sat on a corner lot, I had a clear view of all 4 sides of the house. As I drove around the corner, nothing looks out of the ordinary. About 2 hours later, I drive by again and the back door is wide open. I know that the back door was not open when I drove by it earlier. Looking at the snow on the ground around the house, there were no footprints. So I think, what the hell? I call dispatch, tell them I'm investigating an open door at that address, and ask for a county sheriff to start my way. I walk to the open door, pull out my flashlight, and shine it inside. The house has obviously been gutted for the most part. The plaster walls have been torn down, debris pile everywhere. Since there were no footprints in the snow around the door other than mine, and with all that dust on the floor not showing any footprints, I chalk it up to the wind, or maybe the door just opened on its own. I was about to secure the door when I heard a loud thump come from upstairs and what sounded like kids laughing. So I enter the house and yell out, "Police department, come downstairs!" And then I hear more of what sounds like kids playing. I tell dispatch that it sounds like there are kids in the house and start making my way through the kitchen into the living room where the stairs are, all the while cautiously checking the main floor. 2 more times I hear something upstairs, but since I've had no response, I start thinking maybe it's an animal. Still, I hear what I swear was kids laughing. I head upstairs and it gets all quiet. The upstairs is relatively small with a hallway at the top of the stairs that has 1 bedroom on the right, 1 straight ahead at the end of the hall, and a bedroom on the left. As I get to the top of the stairs, I hear a thump in the bedroom to the left. I carefully peek around the corner and it's an empty room with a small pile of plaster and wood debris in the middle. No kidding, sitting on top of the pile of debris was a page torn out of a child's book with a picture of a police officer on it. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. I got out of that room, quickly cleared the other rooms upstairs, and got the fuck out of there. I told dispatch nobody was in the house, I locked the back door, and never went back in there again. My uncle works for dispatch in my town, and he recently told my family of the weirdest call he's ever gotten. He says that he had received a call from a landline one night, and when he answered it, there was only static on the other end. This happened 2 more times. Finally, he calls a squad to go check out the address from the caller ID. When the cops get there and walk into the house, they immediately saw that there was a dead body. The person had been dead for 5 months. The craziest part about it was that there was no electricity or any other utility working, so there was no way they should have been able to get those calls into dispatch. But if they hadn't, who knows how long that person's body would have stayed there. Not my call, but my dad served for 25 years. One night, he gets a call from a woman who says her neighbor has made a pact with the devil. The woman calling is about 35 and a religious wacko. The neighbor called about is about 75 at the time. My dad went over and knocked on the door, and the old lady answers, all happy, nice place decorated the same way for the past 50 years. She invites my dad in without even asking why he came and makes him some coffee and asks how his day was. Naturally, at this point my dad is wondering what the hell the call was about, but it came clear soon. At some point, my dad realizes he isn't the only person she's talking to, and that this lady thinks her apartment is full of people. My dad thanks her for the coffee and she tells him to come back at any time. The whole time she was talking, he was writing down the names of the people she was talking to, and he does some research on her when he gets back. Turns out, she was talking to family members who were all dead. She had a daughter, 3 sons, a brother, and a husband. all dead, and she had no family and no friends. She hadn't spoken to another person in years, her groceries were delivered, and she rarely left her apartment. Over the next 19 years, my dad took care of her. My sister and I came over all the time and just sat there and talked with her. She even taught me how to cook. Over the years, she stabilized and stopped talking to her dead relatives. She just needed people to live with. She actually lived until she was about 94, and she died in the guest room of my parents' house, since it had become harder to take care of her from a distance as she got closer to the end. She was like a grandma for us. A call goes out for reported screaming, and it's mid-January. My father and another officer respond to find a known deranged individual. Very long rap sheet and has been in and out of psychiatric care for years. Sitting on the front porch holding a double-sided wood-splitting axe. Steam is coming up off the grass and there are chunks lying all over the lawn. Upon interviewing the suspect, he admits that he and a friend were playing poker. The suspect was losing nearly every hand, and he came to the conclusion that his friend was a haint, which is Southern for ghost, and he was cheating him. The suspect grabbed the axe, chased his friend outside, and hacked him into dozens of pieces, thus causing the warm blood to create steam on the grass. My dad tells the suspect that he needs to get into the police car because it's haint-proof. He said the suspect dropped the axe and sprinted into the back seat while thanking them for helping him. So pretty much my father convinced an axe murderer to get into his cop car because it's ghost-proof. I recently started working as a security guard, and one of my first assignments was the graveyard shift at a new housing development outside of town. Over the course of the 3 nights I worked there, I had some pretty bizarre things happen. While doing my patrols through the neighborhood, I would often see people watching me from the upper windows of the vacant houses. But when I would enter the house to investigate, they would be empty. One of the first things on my to-do list when I arrived on site was to go through the 8 model homes next to the real estate office and turn off all the lights and TVs. The first night, things went smoothly, but the following night, as I was making my way through the kitchen of the 4th house, I heard the light switch click and all the lights in the kitchen went out. It wasn't a power surge or a blown breaker, as all the appliances were still on and all the little green lights underneath the light switches were still lit. A few minutes later, I heard another click and the lights came back on, followed by the lights in the next house going out, but the TV remained on. By the time I made my way to the next house, the lights were back on, but the TV was in standby, which is only possible by hitting the button on the front. As I was finishing up in the last house, I looked out the window and saw that the 2nd house and 3rd house were lit up again. The 3rd night, the light situation got weirder. The lights would either turn on or off in a room as I entered it, and in one house, as I entered the kitchen, the hood light over the stove turned on. As I turned to look at it, I heard a series of clicks come from the 2nd floor, as if someone were running through the house turning on all the lights. When I went up there, sure enough, many of the lights I had turned off were back on. In another house, a desk lamp turned itself back on 3 times. Another lamp in the same house that had a dimmer slowly started lighting up right in front of me. Now, for the worst of the events. As I was walking past one of the construction sites, I saw what appeared to be a skunk walk behind the porta potty. When it walked back out, however, it appeared to look more like a black Shih Tzu. It proceeded to change size, shape, and color several more times right in front of me. Doberman, Bloodhound, Tan Mastiff, then finally a yellow lab, before running off into the dark. I'm willing to concede all of these can be chalked up to my mind and eyes playing tricks, or a timer gone haywire. I was assured there wasn't one, but This last one defies logical explanation. As I was walking back to the office around 2:30, I glanced up at one of the houses. As I did, something hit me in between my left pec and shoulder, hard enough to stagger me. I weigh 250 pounds, so I'm not exactly little. It felt as if someone were walking the opposite direction on the sidewalk and shoved their way past me. I have since asked my supervisors not to assign me to that site ever again.